All right, everybody, let's get started. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today for the monthly Entelo webinar that is kind of co-hosted and ran by some of our clients. Today, we're going to be speaking with GE Digital's TJ Bonner. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know that we're going to probably have some people rolling in throughout the webinar, but everyone who is RSVP'd and who is on the line, or the people who even couldn't make it, are going to be receiving a recording of this later in the week. So keep an eye out for that. But as a basic agenda for today, I just want to first introduce myself as well as TJ, so you can kind of get a background, see where we're coming from. Then we're going to walk through a couple main topics, just some best practices that TJ has kind of developed over his years of recruiting at multiple organizations. We're also going to talk about the main challenges that he's currently facing, kind of how he's overcoming them. And then lastly, we're going to kind of dive into some evangelization and just see how he is a leader internally at GE for the recruiting team, and kind of some of the best practices he shares and workflows with his colleagues and so forth. So with that being said, I want to definitely introduce both of us. First off, my name is Andrew Carroll. I'm a customer engagement manager here at Entelo. All that really means is that I am working with our enterprise end users on a day-to-day basis, just making sure that they're able to leverage all of Entelo's key features. That entails, group, trainings, one-on-one training, having just discussions. But my background is in all hands-on technical recruiting prior to coming here to Entelo. So I'm pretty much the client's go-to for recruiting best practices, as well as anything that is Entelo-based. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and kick it over to TJ. Go ahead and introduce yourself, TJ.
Hey, everybody. I'm giving everybody a virtual wave right now. So just kind of talking about my journey into recruiting. I think, like a lot of people, I kind of stumbled into recruiting. I started my career as a project manager at Cisco, but eventually I was working on some projects that involved HR and recruiting, and so I was spending time with the sourcing and recruiting teams, and I just kind of thought these were like the cool kids on the playground, and so I wanted to spend more time with them. And so eventually that led to me doing kind of like market intelligence and sourcing type activities there. That led to my job at Facebook, where I was working full-time in recruiting. One thing led to another. I ended up at Uber, where I was doing technical sourcing, specifically for product managers. And so now, latest job I have is at GE Digital. So this is like the technology or startup branch of GE. And again, I'm focusing on product managers and designers. But I actually just found out that I'm making the shift to executive sourcing here. So I'm going to be focusing on VP above, CTOs, those types of folks for GE Digital. So, yeah.
That's awesome, and congrats on the promotion.
Thank you.
We'll have to dive into that a little bit later in the call. But I know kind of first off, what we wanted to do is kind of hear about your current environment at GE Digital. I think, GE is one of those massive organizations that everyone's heard of and probably has different thoughts towards it. So I definitely wanted us to kind of level set and just let all the listeners and attendees kind of understand what your current environment is. So they have that context as we start to move into best practices and so forth.
Sure. So current environment, GE Digital is kind of like the technology or startup branch of GE, like I said. And we're really going through hyper growth mode. Like, we're hiring like crazy. And so it's a really busy time for the recruiting team here. Compared to other places I've worked, speed to hire is pretty similar. I'd say rec load is higher here. A lot of the recruiters are holding 30 or 40 recs, so it's pretty crazy. So we've been doing some different things to kind of address that, and I can talk more about that later. Specifically, like right now, I just stepped out of a recruiting event where we brought on a bunch of folks to all interview in the same day, and we're all going to gather as a team and do our debriefs today as well. And I can talk more about that if you're interested, Andrew.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's one of the things that, as you and I were discussing previously, kind of one of the main differences that you guys have started to utilize at GE, which I think is extremely interesting. And we actually just even approached the subject right before hopping on this webinar, so I want to hear more about it. It sounds like you essentially are trying to focus all one day into just blocking out the entire day, and everyone who is involved in that rec is just hyper focused on interviewing those candidates and kind of just making sure that it's all taken care of in one day. Is that correct? Is that what you guys are doing, or?
Yeah. So I think everybody that works in recruiting has experienced this, the challenges of organizing hiring manager or team interviews. The way a lot of it works is like you block time on your hiring manager's calendar for them to interview a candidate. And so, they look, oh, it's 2:00. Like they stumble into the meeting room. There's somebody sitting down. They're like, okay, I guess I'll ask you some questions. And it's kind of a disjointed experience. So because we have so much demand for candidates right now, we've just been doing mass days where we structure it where everybody comes in the morning with the idea that they're going to spend the entire day interviewing people, and we're going to have debriefs, and we're going to come to decisions during that day. And so everybody's able to kind of have that interviewer hat on the whole day, as opposed to, doing day-to-day work and then all of a sudden being thrust into this interview position. And, the advantages to that are logistically, you can say 2-3 weeks in advance, like, okay, guys, team, on this day, we're going to spend the whole day interviewing. Or you could say, okay, this day, we're going to spend the whole morning interviewing. And so you can break it up like that. It's helpful because, during the morning, you can have a team huddle where everybody gets together. It's like, okay, this is what we're looking for in the candidates. These are the people that we're going to be talking to. Here's the questions we want to ask and what we want to get out of this. And then at the end of that, you can just on the spot huddle together, have a debrief, and depending on if you can do this, make an actual offer decision.
Oh, that's incredible. And I think for a lot of reasons. One, obviously, it drastically increases the speed to hire. But also, I know for myself, and it doesn't matter what type of work I'm doing, I get into these grooves, hyper focus, and then someone inevitably will come over and ask a question, or I'll need to go jump over and do another task or fight a fire. And then getting back into that mindset of where I previously was takes so long for me. So I imagine that the same is true in interviewing, right? You have an interview, like you said, you may stumble in, you might not be prepared, you got other things on your mind. You go ahead and conduct that interview, and then your debrief's not till 5 meetings later. Then you have other candidates that you met maybe the previous week or a couple of days before, and you're trying to do all that comparison in your head, and that's just a lot to take in. And I think it's way more efficient being able to just do that all in one day. And it sounds like, is this something that maybe is the entire interviewing process, like all rounds, from first round all the way through offer, or is it maybe just those candidates who you're trying to make a decision for in the last round? How does all that work?
Yeah, so the sourcing team will still go in, like they do their search, they find candidates that are prospects, and we'll have like a screening call just to, kind of gauge, like, okay, is this person worth bringing on site? But instead of having round 2, round 3, round 4, the interview day takes the place of all of that. So you meet with somebody at 9 a.m. They're going to ask you specific questions on this topic. 9:30, it's a different topic. 10, it's a different topic. And so you get all of those rounds out of the way.
Oh, awesome. And then I imagine that, it's a great candidate experience as well, because they can also just go there. One of the things, interviewing is so hard when you currently have a job to interview is having to go back time and time again. And everyone's always played this game of, I got to go to the doctor, whatever it may be. And it just feels weird from a candidate side of things. Like,
yeah,
rest to the interviewing process. So I imagine this takes a lot out of it, where they can just take one full day, know that by the end of the day, they're going to know either a yes or a no, and then they can get on with their job search or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and also just on the topic of candidate care, you're able to do some things that are more white glove, high touch. Like we offer breakfast and lunch. So people come in, they can get a cup of coffee. There's some fresh fruit and pastries and stuff out. Then they go in the interview a little bit more relaxed. Same thing for the candidates that are coming in the afternoon during lunch. We'll have some food out there so they can grab a bite to eat. And, because, again, they're collective and everybody's focus is this, we'll have some swag ready. We can give them like some kind of giveaways to get them to think about GE. And it just leaves a good taste in people's mouth when they leave the campus. Like they're like, yeah, that was a cool experience. Like I wasn't just like hustled in and hustled out.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like that's so important too nowadays, that having that recruiting brand, so to speak, is extremely important. And one of the best things you can have from a candidate is when they don't get the job, but they still will evangelize and preach out there that one of the best interviewing experiences they had, even without getting the job, was GE because of that. And I think other organizations being able to do that, and I think this is a great opportunity to build that brand for an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Super important, like in this space, like the technology space.
Yeah, and I think speaking of that kind of your space, like I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, where GE has a huge plant, and I know GE as the jet engine manufacturing side of things. So if you could, I'd love to hear, before we get into like best practices and so forth, I'd love to hear kind of what GE is doing on the digital side and kind of how that focus or how you focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a pretty interesting story. So for a long time, like you mentioned in Cincinnati, GE has been known for big hardware products like jet engines, power plants, wind turbines, train engines, those types of like big hardware products. And so now these products are so ingrained with software that you can't even really think of them as just a software product or a hardware product. So it's kind of like your smartphone. You don't look at that as just a software product or a hardware product. It's both. And so, there's a big push to create these smart machines. So just as an example, a jet plane flying from San Francisco to LA, it has 200 sensors on each one of those engines. It might collect 100 terabytes or more of data during that flight. And so, with that data, we're able to understand the health of that machine to a much greater extent. We're able to predict fuel economy, wear and tear. We're able to predict, based on the humidity of an engine operating in the Pacific Northwest, when exactly it's going to need maintenance versus an engine that's operating in Australia or Japan, because, we're definitely a global company. And so, getting all this data out of that is able to, we're able to do preventive maintenance before things break down. Like it's much cheaper to do preventive maintenance. This is true with pretty much anything in life than it is to fix something that's broken down in the field. So that's part of it, smart machines. The second piece we're building is this open source platform called Predix. So this is connecting all these smart machines together. So, it's kind of crazy. Like right now, if you went into a power plant in a lot of the places in the world, it's super old school. Not all power plants are like this, but a lot of them are. You have folks like literally reading gauges and writing down on a paper clipboard, and that paper gets filed away someplace never to be seen again. So with these sensors and analytics, we're able to get that information out of all these machines that are operating, and actually operate them kind of like an Internet of Things type system where we're able to turn things off, turn things on, predicting when things are going to break down. We're even able to build apps on top of that because we don't see GE building every single app for every single use case. You could build an app for a power plant that says, okay, during when power prices are this high, we'll sell electricity. During when these power prices are this low, we'll automatically shut it off and not sell electricity. And that's just like the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to it, but that's kind of like a brief overview of how to think of it.
Yeah.
Hope that makes sense.
Very fascinating. Yeah, no, it does. I mean, it's very fascinating. I think, as you mentioned, the Internet of Things is something that's kind of a subset of the tech industry that's kind of blowing up and becoming huge. And that's something that I would have never thought in my head, just knowing my background of what I know about GE, would have never guessed that they were doing things like that. So it's fascinating to hear, and it definitely gives me a better mindset of kind of what you're recruiting on, those types of people that you're looking for. And I think that's probably very different than kind of your past experiences at Facebook and Uber. But I kind of love this kind of shift first off into kind of some of the best practices that you kind of developed over, your recruiting career. And I know you and I previously have talked to mainly about three of them. I think the first one that you had mentioned that's the best practice for you is being able to just track your outreach. So my first question was kind of like, so obviously within Entelo, you can use track to be able to see when people open and click and respond to your messages and so forth. But how do you utilize the tracking feature for your outreach?
So I have my own personal tracker. Everybody's applicant tracking system is different. Some, are able to provide all those tracking functionalities within a single tool. A lot of people don't have that. So it kind of depends on what you're working with. So for me, I do have my own personal tracker. I don't know how people can work without one. It takes me 2 seconds to add a name and a LinkedIn profile into there, and lets me know exactly when I reached out, so that I can follow up. I mean, it's just so critical. I mean, you're working with so many different candidates. 3 months down the line, I can just like really quickly go on my track and be like, okay, Andrew, what was he working on 3 months ago? Oh, I think he's a good fit for this role that's coming up in 2 months. And so you're able to recycle a lot of candidates that way. You're just kind of missing out on a lot if you're not doing that. Second thing is just following up with these candidates. A lot of times when somebody gets an email, they're, walking, they just looked at it really briefly on their smartphone, kind of think in their head, okay, yeah, I'm going to respond, then they never do. And so that's why I think follow-ups are really important. And, for me, using Entelo, in the past, I've been we can talk about it in a minute, but one feature I found was really helpful was the automated follow-up feature. So I'm pretty proud of my response rate when reaching out to candidates. And part of that is through following up. So, maybe 15, 20% of your candidates respond on your first go around, your first outreach. Then your second outreach, maybe 10% more respond. Then, on your third outreach, maybe 5% more respond. And so that adds up to hundreds of candidates that are responding, over time. And, these are candidates that, you would just slip through the cracks if you weren't doing that outreach. So I think that's super critical. And it's something that you can automate through Entelo.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think one question I would have about that, and I think a lot of the recruiters that I work with, it all comes down to just time management and being able to manage that process and have the time. I mean, as you mentioned, you have recruiters out there who are in hyper hiring mode and have such a massive rec load that they need to work on, and having the time to follow up with candidates seems like something that they just don't have time to do. How do you handle that? Is that something where you just say, no, you just got to grin and bear it, or do you just block out, hours on your calendar each week where you're solely focused on following up with people? Or what are kind of your thoughts around that? Like, how do you stay on top of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you have time to source, then you have time to follow up with candidates. Because if you're not going to be following up these candidates, then you're going to be looking for new candidates anyways. So, your list in your tracker, these candidates that are already a fit because you looked at the resume or LinkedIn, they're already in your tracker. So all you need to do is just really quickly just go through, maybe set a block of time on your calendar once a week, Friday morning, whatever, to follow up with these candidates that you've already reached out to. And so then you can just like go in and breeze through it and just, send out a follow-up. And, by saving a template, you're able to cut down on that follow-up time. Like, for me, if I personalize every email, but I have a rough template of what I'm going to say. So it's like, it's like a compliment. I, kind of point out some of the things that they're working on. But, the kind of like general stuff like, hey, what's a good time for you to talk this week? That's a template. I don't know how everybody else is doing it, but like, and same thing with your follow-ups. So, your follow-up is like, hey, I haven't heard from you. Just wanted to see if you're still interested. And so again, template, you can just like blaze through that and send that out, and just, kick your response rate up a few points.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think, speaking to your comment about the templates, I think that's something that we always try to tell people as well, is don't think of a template as just the exact message you're going to send to every candidate, because that's just not going to work. It's the fact that that's not going to work. You have to personalize it, and you should utilize a template more so for those things that are not going to change across candidates. So you kind of use the template as a supplement to what you're going to send to a candidate, not the whole message.
Exactly.
And I think so too, following up using the tracking within Entelo, we just recently revamped kind of the track dashboard, so to speak, or kind of that tab you go to where you can see all your sent messages and kind of what's happening with them. And one of the changes that they made that I really like is being able to filter out and say, hey, just show me those emails I've sent that have been opened, or just show me the ones that have been opened and clicked on. So that way it kind of helps you more visualize, these are the candidates I need to follow up with quickly, and kind of just cuts down the time it's going to take to do all of that.
Yeah, and if you want to get super crazy with it, like I get a message through my Entelo extension that shows, hey, somebody just clicked on this link that you have in your outreach. And so I can send them a real quick email like, hey, let me know if you have any questions, because I know they're online, they're already in their email, and that just bumps the response rate up a few points.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And now we're talking about, go ahead.
And you know, we can talk more about this later, but like, I mean, I don't want to spend 6 hours of my day in front of the computer sourcing. Like, you know, my eyeballs will fall out. You know, I want to cut down on that time so I can have more time talking with candidates, doing, you know, market research, you know, setting up meetings with the hiring manager, stuff like that. You know, you want to cut down on that as much as you can. And so you want to just be as efficient as possible during that piece, and you know, follow-ups, templates, and that's the way you do it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And we can definitely, I think we have more topics about that kind of later on in the webinar, kind of discuss that again as we come back to it. I know that the second best practice that, or thing that you utilize that we kind of discussed as well, was kind of the diversity sourcing. So is diversity recruiting, or are there any actual diversity initiatives at GE currently that you're kind of trying to meet, or how does all that work?
So it's kind of in the beginning stages. It's funny enough, I actually have a meeting on the topic of diversity sourcing tomorrow. And so, you know, it's something that we've really put a lot of thought into, and we're starting to kind of ramp it up right now. I know everybody keeps diversity in mind, you know, with just their general workload. Like, it's not like, hey, you know, 2 hours a week, you're going to be working on diversity initiatives. It's like every time you're doing a search, or, you know, taking on a new rec, you're keeping in your mind like diversity and how important it is. So I use it more in the past, specifically talking about the Entelo diversity feature when I was at Facebook, because you know, that was part of my work there. You know, being able to
makes perfect sense.
Yeah, being able to kind of filter and focus like on a particular category in the diversity space was super helpful. So, you know, you didn't have to change your search string at all. You didn't have to add anything. You know, you just click the button and like, okay, you know, here's a shorter list with some of these other folks that I'm targeting from the diversity space.
Yeah, and some of the things I like to mention to some of the clients that I work with is not every company right now as it stands has a really well built out focus on diversity. But what we're seeing is more and more companies are starting to hire people specifically for that, to run their diversity initiatives. So I always like to mention to, you know, the recruiters that I work with is, even if you don't have a diversity initiative right now and you're just trying to fill these roles, still, because of the ease of utilizing that filter within Entelo, why not get in the habit of doing it now? So that way, when that initiative comes down and you have all these other KPIs and metrics you need to hit, it's already part of your workflow and it's already muscle memory. So you don't have to now learn something else and change your workflows. It's better to get ahead of that curve, because it's going to come, right? It's such a huge focus for so many companies, and they're building out such great programs around that, which is exciting to see. And it's one of those things that just get ahead of it so that we don't have to change your workflow later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that too is actually a good topic. I mean, the diversity recruiting in general is a fantastic topic. And we actually, next month's webinar, which is hosted by my colleague Erica, she's actually bringing on some of her clients to talk specifically about this, some of the initiatives that they're doing, some of their best practices, and how they've started to develop that program. So if anyone's interested in that topic, 100% definitely register for the next webinar next month, because it's going to be a great one. Then the next best practice I know you had mentioned, and this is one that I always talk about this filter, but I think you utilize it in maybe a little bit different way than I've actually talked to people about it, which is the exclusions filter. So the thing that I always say about the exclusions filter really is I just fall back on saving time, and I really just focus on, you know, excluding any candidates that I've recently viewed, or, you know, excluding when I've contacted, or as my organization is contacted. But as you and I kind of discussed previously, you have a workflow in place that actually is around building lists and then, I guess, excluding people from that list to maybe make your candidates in your search results more digestible, or what's kind of your workflow there with this filter specifically?
Yeah. So like just as important is like in your search string, including the candidates you want, it's just as important to like exclude the candidates that aren't a fit, right? Let's be real.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you're looking through search results, a lot of times you're not clicking on a candidate because you can tell from their job title or education in the summary, and this is true on Entelo or LinkedIn, that they're not a fit for what you're looking for, right? And so, just because you haven't clicked on them or contacted them, they're still showing up in your search results. So what I do is, I'll create my list, I'll filter down, maybe it's like a list of 300 candidates I need to look through. So I'll breeze through those 300 candidates, and then I add them to a list by clicking the list function in Entelo and creating a custom list. And, that might be, software engineer search 1, for example, or product management search 1. So that's your first go round. So then if you add that list of candidates to the exclusions list, when you do your second search with maybe a slightly changed search string, those candidates won't show up again. So that way, you're able to, go through another list of candidates that you haven't looked at before. Because, going through just a list of, let's say, 1,000 candidates, you just can't get through it. But if you break it down into lists, like 300 here, just broke it down, 300 here, just broke it down, you're actually able to get through a long list of candidates and able to keep your search string pretty broad.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. And I think I like that how you kind of take those steps towards digesting all of those candidates. I remember when I recruited and you had your search string in there, and maybe the hiring manager didn't give you a really specific skills they need, and you kind of have a broad search going. Well, it's kind of daunting looking at that and saying, great, now I have to go through 1,000 candidates today. This is going to be fun. But when you kind of break it down, like you said, more in chunks and being able to exclude those people in the next go around, it makes the number of candidates you can actually look at in a given period of time much larger. So you're able to actually get to those candidates you may have otherwise looked over, not because they're not a fit, but just because you simply didn't have the time.
Yeah. So it's super helpful for me. Like that was actually the thing that just like got me super pumped to work with Entelo, because I was doing my search strings on LinkedIn, and I was just like seeing the same candidates. Like they had this, maybe they had just added everything, the whole kitchen sink into their profile. They had all the keywords. They kept showing up in my search results, even though I knew they weren't a fit. And there wasn't a button where I could just be like, block this candidate from my search results. And so, it takes up a lot of space in your search string results. So, when you were talking about like tens and hundreds of candidates, so this got me super engaged in Entelo.
That's awesome. And out of curiosity, so when you're making these lists, are you making lists and adding candidates that are solely a fit, or do you also make lists for candidates to go to that maybe missed the mark because of one or two things that you could then go back to later? So my thought is, if you are also making lists for those people who maybe just didn't make the cut but could be fit later down the line, then when you're still working on this particular rec, you can exclude that given list because okay, maybe at this point we're not broadening the search that much. I just want to focus on those perfect candidates. But then you can always go back to and say, okay, maybe the perfect candidates are not out there. Let's go back to that list of someone who's missing maybe one skill set. And then bam, you already have a small subset pool there that you've already created from your original source and efforts. You're not having to duplicate it.
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's two lists. So like I'll go, again, maybe I have 300 people in my search results. I go through the list, I'm clicking and adding all the candidates I think, are kind of a match to my list. Once I get through that list of 300 people, I add all of those 300 people to the already viewed list. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a real quick way to kind of just, like you said, save some time and get through a lot more candidates than you previously thought that you could in a given time.
Yeah.
So kind of what hot to, I know those are the main best practices that we talked about, but we also kind of discussed in previous conversations some of the challenges you're facing. I think there's really one main challenge that I had a couple things I wanted to point out about to kind of just get your mindset and kind of how you're working around it. And it kind of goes back to that thing you mentioned earlier, a feature you loved, which was the auto follow-ups. So for everyone listening, just kind of give a background. Essentially, Entelo has 3 or 4 different integrations one can do for our track, and really just the integration depends on what your email client is. For example, if your company uses Gmail, we can integrate with that, so you can have auto follow-ups trigger, you can get response rates. Same with Exchange and Outlook. But some people, for certain reasons which you can get into, don't necessarily have that integration set up yet. So they get what we call our generic integration, which still allows for open rates and click rates, being able to see that, but you don't get the response rate tracking that also comes with auto follow-ups in our templates. And auto follow-ups, just so everyone knows, the level set is essentially you send the first message in the template, and then if the candidate doesn't respond in X amount of days, we will auto fire that follow-up for you to obviously save you some time and be more efficient there. But it sounds like that's a feature you previously had access to. Now at GE, maybe things have been a little bit different. I know we're working on getting that integration in place. So talk to me about that challenge and kind of how you got the conversation started internally to work towards that integration, and maybe why getting that integration in place has been difficult.
Yeah. So when I was at Uber, we used Gmail, and so I was really easily able to use that feature for whatever reason. I think it's probably some type of security permission or barrier or whatever.
Yeah.
But I have been able to use it here at GE, which is a little bit challenging. My work around those, I just block some time on Friday morning. Usually only takes me like 20 or 30 minutes because I just blaze through that list of candidates that haven't followed up and send out my follow-up like that. But it was a really cool feature, and if you're able to get your IT department to give you the okay, then it's well worth it. That is one of the challenges of working with a big IT department. You put in a request and they don't quite understand it. They say it sounds like you're giving access to Entelo to look through your email or something, and it's not really like that. And so it can be kind of tough with bigger IT departments. I'll say.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense, and that's kind of, this is why you really start utilizing your own tracker, which we kind of have an example here of kind of how you stay organized with your candidates and kind of your outreach 1, outreach 2. And that's why you use this Excel sheet to kind of stay on top of those follow-ups, correct?
Right. And so, I started the conversation with the IT department. First, we have an IT help desk, and, they weren't able to, resolve it. So, escalated to the next IT stage because I really wanted this. This was, saving me a lot of time. So then, escalated to the IT manager. It's still kind of going through the process, but I hope I can get it in the future.
Yeah, I think we are. I'll be checking on that with my colleague who also works on this account to make sure we're pushing that forward. I know there's been some communication, but I really do like this Excel spreadsheet that you have. I think when I was recruiting, I was old school. I consider this old school because there's so many things now you can track your outreach. It's kind of Excel is old school, but for me, it was how I stayed organized. And one thing that I think, if a lot of people are like you and I, and they do this as well, I want to make sure people know that you can export from Entelo, so you're not having to copy and paste all this information. I was on site with a client of mine a couple months ago, and I was working with some recruiters who they all have these massive Excel spreadsheets, and they were kind of walking me through them, and they were pointing out, oh yeah, my workflow is I open up this candidate, I think they're great, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy their email, I'm going to paste it here, and copy all these links. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, if you build a list, you can check off those candidates in bulk, and then there's this little button that pops up that says export to CSV, which essentially is just an Excel spreadsheet, and it kind of mind-blowing for them. So if you're listening and you like to make spreadsheets like TJ and I and some other people, definitely make sure that you're exporting those candidates in the CSV file, because that's going to save you a lot of pain and a lot of just manual data entry to be able to get those spreadsheets kind of set up really quickly.
For sure.
And kind of, I know that's kind of like the biggest challenge we're kind of working through, and it's obvious that you need to find something to be able to kind of track all this and continue with your follow-ups, because as you mentioned, that's kind of like one of the most important things that you kind of noticed along your path. As far as some other workflows and so forth, I mean, coming into, well, being that you've been in so many different environments, recruiting, now you're at GE, kind of what are some of the kind of workflows, or what are some of the kind of the things or messages you kind of evangelize to your colleagues to kind of change what GE's been doing as far as recruiting and kind of bring on new, I guess, styles of recruiting and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I've really been trying to push more targeted searching. What I mean by that is just like, the style of sourcing or candidate outreach where, you build a list in LinkedIn of everybody who has engineer in their job title and you just send them a mass email. That's just like so time consuming, and the response rate is just so low. Like, you're reaching out to 100 people and, you're hoping one or two respond. I mean, it blew my mind when I first got here. There was a source on my team that said he reaches out to 100 people a day. I was like, are you serious? Like, there's no way there could be any type of personalization in that. I was like, really? Like, no way. And he was dead serious. He's like, yeah, and that's how he was getting his offers and hires. And I mean, that's just kind of like spamming. And for me, I very rarely respond. I never respond to spam emails. So that's why I was really pushing Entelo, because you have these options to like use a template and personalize, and then also you're able to kind of like look at people's social media profiles. You're able to look at Facebook and kind of see, okay, this person just moved to the East Coast. I probably shouldn't reach out to them for a role in California. Oh, this person likes dogs. Maybe I could put something clever in my outreach that kind of speaks to that. Or maybe they were a graduate of a certain university, and I see from their Facebook profile that they're heavily invested in the Florida Gators football team. So I might say something about that. So just having more intel, like data points like that helps you with targeted searches. And especially for me, I've been working on design. And so, having easy access to folks' portfolios, a lot of times, Entelo will have somebody's email address, their website, or, their Behance portfolio. I'm able to click on that and just really quickly see like, okay, this is somebody I should be reaching out to. So yeah, that's like a few things I've been doing to just evangelize Entelo, because, come down on people's time.
For sure. And I think you mentioned to me at one point in one of our previous conversations about kind of your focus sometimes around some really niche roles. And I feel like personalization kind of helps you along with your mindset of having to, as you mentioned to me before, nurture the relationship with candidates. Because I think if you're looking at these niche roles that a lot of people work on, there, in all honesty, may only be 30 people that could do that type of position in this area. So obviously you're going to reach out to them all and go through them really quickly, but it's the following up with them. It's the bringing a fresh, viewpoint or angle on the quote unquote recruiter email that's going to, over time, build up that relationship with that candidate.
Yeah, that's super important. So like a lot of times, you go through you go into your intake meeting with the hiring manager. They give you like this, they really want you to find this unicorn, right? This purple unicorn. Mm-hmm. And it has, there's all this stuff that they need to have perfectly, right? And so, there might only be, like you said, like 20 or 30 people in the Bay Area that have that skill set. And so, you can reach out to all those people in one day, and then maybe none of them are interested. Maybe only 3 of them respond. So are you just gonna move along to people that don't have that criteria? That's one option. Or you can really focus on those 30 people and like do follow-ups, maybe become more targeted in your follow-ups the second time around. Like, your first outreach, you use a template. Second outreach, it's more personalized. Third outreach, maybe have the hiring manager do that. Maybe you can look through the network of people that work at your company that know that person and have them reach out to that person. So that way, instead of, reaching out to people that are not meeting the requirements and you're kind of settling for people that don't have the qualifications, you're re-engaging. You're more likely to find and hire one of those first 30. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I think that's something that you just need to get a mindset of doing. And I know for a lot of people who haven't taken this approach before and like kind of highly customized emails, it kind of from time to time seems, for lack of a better word, corny or like uncomfortable or awkward maybe. But it's one of those things where, I mean, even if you're not comfortable with, reaching out about their love for dogs or something like that, my suggestion would be to, go into your original outreach, and if they don't respond, why not give it a shot? You got nothing to lose, and it's gonna more often than not be a breath of fresh air. Because I know I get a ton of recruiter emails, and they're all the exact same about a position that I don't have interest in, or maybe I would have interest in if they actually, explained it better, or they can't do a different approach. But when they come at me with, "Hey, came across your profile, it's great for this role here at this company, are you interested?" Kind of just, it's a message that could have been blasted to 100 other people just like me, and I'm just going to pretty much ignore it. So kind of going back to that personalization, taking a fresh approach, and allowing your email to stand out from all the other emails that candidates are receiving. Because, that perfect candidate that you have for your rec, well, guess what? That's the perfect candidate for 100 other people's recs. So it's one of those things where you just got to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah. And, knock on wood, just to kind of boost your self-esteem a little bit, I've never had any candidate respond like this was a stupid email. That just doesn't happen. So, be mindful. You don't want to send like an email that's like insulting or too creepy, but like nobody's gonna like be too harsh on you for sending something that's goofy.
Yeah, it makes sense. You gotta try it from time to time. And kind of, I know we kind of covered pretty much most of the stuff that you and I have previously discussed that we wanted to cover. But I was actually curious because you mentioned earlier in the call that you're now kind of switching away from the design and product management aspect of recruiting and kind of moving more towards the VP and executive kind of recruiting. So I'm actually curious, some of your initial, I know you just found out about this, but what are some of your initial thoughts, or kind of how do you feel this switch in focus is going to affect your recruiting habits and your use of Entelo?
It's even more high touch, more white glove treatment for these folks, and more targeted. So I think I'm gonna have to spend more time, in LinkedIn, in Facebook, finding people that know these people to make that connection. Also looping in the hiring manager to do outreach if they don't respond to me the first go round. So yeah, I mean, I think Entelo usage will probably go up, or because I think it's going to be. I don't think my gut sense is these folks aren't going to be responding to generic LinkedIn message. I could be wrong, but I think I'm going to have to really customize these and point out specific things in their background that make them a fit for this new role. Like, hey, your experience at IBM working on this specific cloud technology fits exactly with this technology that we're building here. Could we have a conversation? Or like, hey, by the way, my friend Andrew, he used to work at VMware. He really said you were an expert in this technology. Do you want to have a conversation about what we're doing here? I think I'm going to have to leverage Entelo more to get that type of information.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think so too. That kind of speaks to what my methodology towards outreach always was when I was recruiting. Was I wanted my messaging to the person to be more about their breadth of experience throughout their career, and less of, I saw you worked here with this position, here's a similar position. 'Cause I feel like that's an approach that's just so generic and blanketed. But if you talk to, the types of projects they've worked on or the other environments that they're a part of, and compare that to how that experience will not only be similar environmentally to your current position you're trying to recruit for, but also, hey, because of this experience in your background, this is the exact impact you're going to have on this project or this team. Because people want to hear that, right? They want to hear more, not necessarily this is the day-to-day of what you're going to be doing, but this is how you're going to impact the team, and this is what you bring to the table, and this is why we want you specifically for this role. So definitely, I think that you're kind of right in line there with how you're going to be needing to reach out to these new candidates.
Yeah, it's a lot more flattering too. I mean, I think people will kind of, that's a lot more engaging than just like, hey, I see that, you work here and, I'd like to talk with you. If somebody sent me that email that Andrew just described, I'll have the conversation with them, even if I'm not looking, even if I'm not interested, just to learn more, because, it sounds like they've done their homework, and, this is just an informal conversation. So, I would respond to that, even if I'm not interested.
Yeah, it's more about, at that point, networking and exploring versus being recruited for a particular role.
Yeah.
Awesome, TJ. Well, I really appreciate your time today and hopping on the line with me and kind of walking through all of these challenges and best practices in Evangeline. I think one of the coolest things, which we didn't even originally talk about discussing, was kind of the all-day interview and event you guys are doing, which I think is an awesome idea. I really want to hear from you how that turns out, because I'm very curious. Hopefully it ends with an offer to a fantastic candidate, but I think that's a topic and an idea there that we could have a whole nother webinar on. So maybe in the future we set something like that up. But thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, and by the way, we're hiring sorcerers, guys. Just want to throw that out there.
Love the plug. Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone else who is on the line and took time to attend this webinar. I hope you brought some knowledge out of this. As mentioned, everyone who RSVP'd will be receiving a recorded copy of this later in the week. So definitely keep an eye out for that. You can see here on this last slide, my contact information is just andrew@entelo.com. Pretty straightforward. If anyone has any questions or any feedback or want to just dive more into any of the topics we discussed today, I'm more than happy to hop on the line with anyone and make sure we got all your questions answered. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.